it's now my real pleasure this evening to welcome Harry Fletcher-Wood to the webinar tonight. Harry is a trained teacher and he's taught in schools in Japan, India and the UK. And he is now a teacher educator at Ambition Institute in the UK and is also an author. He has written on responsive teaching and also has been spending the last couple of years researching behavioural science influencing student behaviour, and will be, I think, releasing his new book shortly if he has not done so already. But now it's my real pleasure to welcome Harry this evening, or this morning for him in the UK. Harry, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me, Nina. And yes, the new book will be finished one day, but not quite yet.
Brilliant. So I guess just to start off with, we're talking this evening about engagement and motivation, and I just wondered if you could give us a bit of a summary of what the research would suggest teachers should be thinking about when considering how to engage and motivate students during distance learning.
Sure. I mean, I guess the first bit of research I've reached to is the need to prioritize, whether that's in changing habits or in managing our own cognitive load. And look, there are loads and loads of things teachers could do, but it's really important that we just pick out 2 or 3 and we focus on those, because otherwise it's going to be overwhelming for us and also overwhelming for our students. And so if I were to pick out 2 or 3 things I'd really encourage a teacher to do, the first is to look at how you form habits for your students. So it's not a matter of how do I get them to do this worksheet this week, because if that's your target, that means every time you want students to do something, you need to like set the task, set it up for them, hassle them, chase them, and that becomes rapidly really exhausting. The challenge is, how do I get them to do their math worksheet every week, and how do I get them to form positive habits that are going to make sure they're continuing to work through this period until I get to see them face to face again. First thing, look at forming habits, because once students have formed a habit and it's become automatic, they don't have to think about it so much. It's just like, oh yeah, Tuesday morning is always my time to do English or whatever it is. And then a couple of other things that I think are tied to that idea of habit formation. One is helping students to plan a study routine, and particularly picking conducive times, planning out when they're going to act, making commitments to their parents or to you to say, like, okay, the time that I'm going to do it is at 9 a.m. and I'm going to go show it to my mum when it's finished or whatever. And the last thing is then say, okay, how do we reinforce this? How do we encourage this? How do we maintain some kind of sense of community? And so I'd say highlighting social norms, showing like everyone's doing this, you're still part of the school, we still want you to be contributing, is probably going to be really powerful. So the summary is habits, conducive times, social norms.
Brilliant. And I might just pick up on each of those in turn and get you to delve into them in a bit more detail. So you talk about the importance of forming positive habits, and I guess I was wondering if there are particular habits that you think would be really useful for students and probably teachers to be developing in this particular time of distance learning, and whether there are any strategies that teachers can use to actually help those be cemented.
Sure, yeah. So in terms of habits, again, keep it as simple as possible. We're not going to get to see students if we overcomplicate it. We know some students are going to get lost. So habit 1 is like, look, if I send you a task, do it by a deadline. It's just like, have a regular slot, or be submitting work on a regular basis, or something along the lines of like, the tasks keep happening, and making sure we're getting those back. And then the second one is to say, look, if we're having an online interaction as a one-to-one, as a class, as a school, turn up. And the reason why that sounds sort of like an oversimplification, and it is, but that's deliberate, because we're saying, well, look, the more complicated we make the habit, the more likely it is we lose people. And if students are showing up to those 2 things, showing up by handing their work in, showing up to events, whatever they are, as we get better at online learning, they'll benefit, because if I make my online teaching better and better, we've got loads of people thinking, how do I make a really good video? Now, if I'm making a better and better video, but students aren't turning up, I'm shouting into the night and no one's hearing me. So the first challenge is get everyone turning up, and then start thinking about honing your exposition, honing your responsive teaching, whatever it is that you think is going to make a huge difference. In terms of ways to help students form those habits, it's worth going back to the definition of a habit, which is an action repeated in a specific context until the context comes to cue the action. The example I always give for this is going jogging. And if I'm going to go jogging on a Saturday morning, the first morning I wake up and I'm like, I'm tired, it's raining, I'm not going to go. If I do it enough weeks, then the specific context, Saturday morning, becomes the cue to go running, and I stop worrying about the fact that it's raining and I'm tired and whatever. I'm just like, Saturday morning is always the time that I go for a run. So then it's helping students pick a time and say, okay, you're always going to do your social studies work at 4 p.m. You're always going to do it at your desk, and you're always going to leave your phone in another room before you do that. And once those ingredients come together, students should start to form those habits, and then they don't have to be like, where am I going to do it? Maybe I'll just text my friend. It's like, it's 4 o'clock. It's my time to do whatever the thing is.
Brilliant. And I'm guess listening to you talk, many of these habits that hopefully we'll be instilling in our young people will be actually really valuable things for them to take forward when we move on from our current situation.
Definitely, because it's getting used to studying independently. We're essentially teaching them how to do the stuff we want them to do in the long run anyway.
Yeah. And your second point was around study routines. Is there a particular routine or schedule that you think is more effective at this particular time, or is it literally just creating a routine that works for you as an individual?
I'd lean towards the latter, but I guess that it's worth saying, there are general principles. So most people are freshest in the morning, and then their kind of energy levels, attention decline as the day goes on. That's not the case for everyone. So saying to students, and again, there's like a logical level to this, like if you start off by getting on a games console, it's quite hard to then drag yourself away for like wholehearted studying. So ideally, like, get started as quickly as possible, then you can earn the rest of the day off and like feel like you've achieved something. Hopefully we can sell that to them. But I'd say it's more important just to go through that planning, or help them go through that planning process for themselves. We know, for example, that people are much more likely to do something if they set what we call an implementation intention. So as well as saying, I intend to go running, and I'm going to do it first thing on Saturday morning before I've had breakfast. And once I've got a detailed plan, it's much more likely that I'll actually act on it. So we're asking students to think through, like, okay, when's it going to be? What's it going to come immediately afterwards? And we know that people are more likely to form a new habit, if they tack it onto an existing habit. So, for example, if I always have breakfast, which is a pretty reasonable thing to say. If I always have breakfast, I say I'm going to do X immediately after breakfast. I don't have to like there should be an automatic link to like breakfast and then the next habit.
Yeah, that's really useful. And we've got a few questions coming through which relate and connect into this. And cool. One of them is around an issue that I know has been discussed multiple times in different ways. And there's a question of whether schools should be looking to replicate their existing timetables into an online and distance setting, or whether they should create more flexibility. And also, I guess part of that is whether there's a difference between, say, primary school and secondary school. And I don't know if you have a perspective on that.
So I guess again, what I focus on the principle rather than detail. So that the principle that I focus on is a structure and a schedule is really helpful for students. And if you've read any of the self-help, what should you do as an adult in isolation, that's very much said, form a habit, form a structure, don't let the days just kind of stretch out, because that's how you get like bored and potentially sort of anxious. So I think giving students a structure is really helpful. I'd say I'm agnostic about whether or not it should be the same as the existing school structure. I think the advantage of that is, if we're saying we want students to have habits, if they're used to always doing X at 9 a.m, you're kind of making it easier for them. I guess my my concern would be twofold. One is the kind of teacher workload thing. Like, I would be a little bit concerned if we're saying we want teachers to teach at all the times they'd normally teach. Nina and I were talking earlier about life with a toddler, and I think the idea of trying to be a full-time teacher if potentially your partner is also working at the same time is completely impossible. And to recognize that there may be stuff going on in kids' lives. Parents may not be able to supervise them and give them the support they need if there are several kids at home. So I've got some friends who are doing that at schools in the UK, not very many. I think it's ambitious if you're going to do that. Maybe that's something you try and do with your older kids, or if you can give them independent work. I'd probably moderate my expectations a little bit, but I'd say schedule and structure, really important for them.
Brilliant. And then the third point you raised was around reinforcing and maintaining a sense of community. And I think that's something that we're all really aware of, is the need for social engagement, for connecting with one another, and also just feeling part of something beyond just our own little bubbles. What are some of the ways that teachers or schools could think about trying to develop that sense of community? Is it, say, something that should be tackled at a school-wide level, at an individual teacher and class level? Do you have some thoughts on that?
It's whatever's going to be reasonable and plausible and easy to do. I think there's an advantage to doing it among a group who know their teacher, because actually generally the school-wide level is kind of too big, and as a student I'm like lost within that. And I think one of the things that we probably want to be creating space for is like interaction between students and a trusted adult. So if we do that with 200 or 500 people, that's good. They're not going to get a chance to say anything. So some kind of like online form or homeroom tutor thing, and maybe that's like a half an hour session once a week where people just do like a circle time and they just share what they're up to. Maybe it's some kind of discussion board. And I think the key thing here is like, most of our kids will probably be doing that kind of thing with some of their mates over WhatsApp, but providing an environment in which there's a moderator, and the teacher can say, yes, I have heard that rumor and it is not true, or like, yes, that is an interesting bit of misinformation and you should not follow it because hot water does not kill viruses, is probably quite valuable. I do think there's an important role for the school-wide thing, but I'd say it's more like a broadcast thing. So actually having the head teacher, so an example that I've given is head teacher at a school I know, a primary school, who reads a story for the whole school community at 6 p.m. every Friday. She just invites all parents and all teachers, all students to see it. And she said the first week she did it, like she had 300 views, which is basically every single family in the school. So I think there's a hunger for that. So having the head teacher just do a 10-minute, like, this is where I'm at, this is where we're thinking of you, we still care as a school community, is valuable. So yeah, something whole school, something more closer to the kids.
Brilliant. And we've got lots of questions coming in on a whole range of different topics. But I guess one that sort of follows on from these three key areas for teachers to think about is, we've got a situation in New Zealand where most schools were on holiday for the last couple of weeks. They've come back into school today. Is there a way for teachers to think about how they reconnect with and engage students back in after this period of holidays, particularly thinking about maybe those students who typically are harder to engage even when you're face-to-face in an actual school context?
Yeah, and so I'm going to talk more about the psychological principles, because I think we're going to talk a little bit about technology later on. So assuming you have some way of communicating with your students, whether that's email, Zoom, Skype, sending them a letter, some things you could try and convey to them. One is to say, like, so we often we make a rational case, and we say, like, it's really important that you do X because Y, and often the rational case doesn't get through. So while I'd say make the rational case, like, we don't want you to fall behind, this stuff is all important, people are much better sold on things if you convey a problem to them and then offer them the solution. This is how advertising works. It makes you unhappy, right? They say, look at your, like, how annoying your commute is, or how bad your washing powder is. We've got something better for you. So what's a problem that we can solve for students? Like, I think the biggest one is getting bored and not seeing your friends. For some of our really motivated students, say we want you to be able to progress to the next level. We don't want you to fall behind in school, and that might work for some of them. So like, look, we want you to use this time well. We don't want you to get bored. We want you to benefit in some way from this. We want you to be able to stay in touch with your peers and your friends. So one thing that I'd sort of sell or push on. And then I'd look at the social influences. So one is to look at role models, and the other is to look at social norms. So that might be just pulling out, like, here's what one student has done that's really good. Like, oh, look, they made a project. Oh, look, they helped their parents with build an extension. Or, oh, look, they like read all these books. Now, clearly, if that's the student who people are looking at and like, well, I wouldn't want to do that. That's not going to be so effective. So role models who are credible, who other students look up to and are prepared to learn from. And then the other thing is social norms, and just say, like, look, actually, pretty much everyone is doing their assignments. Pretty much everyone did turn up to our form time. We'd really like you to come along as well. No one likes to miss out. And so if we convey to students, like, you are at risk of missing out if everyone else is there and you are not, I think that's probably the single most powerful motivator.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Circling back to an earlier theme and conversation we were having around building community and facilitating interactions. We've had a few questions on sort of the best ways of thinking about how to actually facilitate that, and how to get students who may not be used to engaging in a learning context online to actually participate, say if you're doing a Zoom call with your class, or you've set up some other way of interacting amongst the students.
So I do quite a lot of training online of teachers primarily, and a couple of things that I've learned is one, like, just use the chat box, because it's sort of like, it's not stressful. Your face isn't going to be shown up on the screen. People can just write down what they're thinking, and so just pausing regularly and saying, what are you thinking? What are you stuck on? What are you wondering on? And actually what I do when I'm using that is say, like, if the answer is nothing, write nothing into the chat box. So there's no opt out, there's no sitting there quietly. There's like, positively tell me if there's nothing that you want to know about. And I to be honest, that does about 80% of the work for me in terms of online stuff, because that just gives me, I can get a pulse check from everyone in about 60 seconds. If people have got questions, I can then call on them to expand on those questions, but students have had the chance to formulate those thoughts. That's the most important thing. The other thing I'd say is as soon as you've got, this works perfectly well between two of us, but as soon as you've got a group of 3 or 4, as you've probably found out if you've been trying to talk to your relatives online recently, all the normal social cues break down because you've got a time lag and you can't read facial expressions properly. So you can't rely on people to like structure a discussion in the same way, because you just don't know if someone's pausing because their screen's frozen or pausing because they actually want you to say something. So if I'm trying to organize a discussion, it's very much to do with nominating people and saying, okay, what do you think? I'm going to call on Fred. And if you do that for long enough, then you build up something more like a natural discussion, but don't wait for students to contribute, because it's too intimidating.
That's actually a really useful pointer, I think, to the idea of actually calling on specific people rather than waiting for a discussion to organically unfold. Just noting the questions coming through, and we've got lots of questions coming back to that idea of the routine and creating a schedule. And a lot of them have to do with particularly children in sort of the lower years of primary school. So you're sort of 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and how a routine and structure works for them. And I guess that's mixed in with a whole range of things about sort of learning priorities for them. What should we be focusing on? And also the fact that they need higher levels often of parental support in order to be able to engage in the learning. And that can be difficult depending on what's happening in the home context and parents have to work. Do you have any thoughts about the role of a routine and schedule, and what that should or could look like for younger children?
I think a routine and a schedule is even more important if you're younger, because actually that's what gives you the consistency. Like, it means you know what's happening, you know what's expected of you. So I think it's really powerful. I just think our expectations need to be much lower, not in terms of whether or not a schedule comes together, but in terms of how long a burst of activity might last for, how many things we'd ask people to do in a day. And, you know, like primary teachers on the call don't need me to tell them that students' attention span is going to be longer, is going to be shorter. So you know, if you've got a 5-year-old, say like, you know, an hour or like 2 separate hours of structured time in a day, you're probably doing pretty well, and you can get a huge amount done in that. And to recognize that kids will be benefiting in some ways from spending more time with their parents as well, and we don't want to create a situation in which parents feel they're unable to manage all these things, again, because, you know, they've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 14-year-old, and you know, that we can't have a parent teaching 3 different lessons at once. But equally, I think we are doing the parent a favor if we say, like, here's an activity that we want you to do with your 5-year-old. Here's how it will work. Like, maybe it's just tracing out letters or whatever it is, but offering them some sort of structured thing. They don't want their 5-year-old running around for 12 hours of the day with nothing to do either. And none of us want them just sitting in front of the TV all day. So yeah, I think the structure remains important, but what we put into it and how long the activities last is going to be different.
Yeah, and that leads me to another question, and that's about, are there particular ways that teachers could think about structuring tasks or activities that they're wanting their students to do that can really help to boost engagement and motivation?
I think that the single most important thing to think about, and I'm maybe banging the same drum here, is simplicity. But when I say that, I'd invite you, if you're listening, to think about all the things that can go wrong in the classroom ordinarily when you design a task, right? So I design a task, I explain it, I say start, and think of all the things that can go wrong. Like, students misunderstand it, students start doing the wrong thing, students get to turn off, they decide they can't do it. And as a classroom teacher, we can monitor that, because we look around and we're like, oh no, nothing is working. Or we start looking at students' work, nothing is working. So now consider the same problem, except you haven't had the chance to like tailor the explanation and answer questions as you go along, and you can't monitor what students are doing. So providing tasks which are familiar, providing tasks which ask students to do something similar each week, but with slightly different content, like anything that you can do that is going to make the task similar to stuff they already know. And that doesn't mean it needn't be cognitively demanding. Some of the most cognitively demanding stuff that we can do, like quizzing ourselves on previous material, can be the same for every topic and can still be really hard because you can forget the previous material. And it can still be really interesting because the previous material, it has its own intrinsic interest, whatever the topic is. But yeah, just make it as simple as possible. And I guess the other thing tied to that is, we know that examples and non-examples are really powerful in showing students how to do things. Like, if I'm giving them a new math problem, I'm going to show them how to do it, and I'm going to show them common misconceptions, things I don't want them to do. And I think that could be a really powerful way, if we're sending home a task with like, this is what your answer should look like, and this is what your answer should not look like, because that model is incredibly powerful. And I'm studying for a PhD, and as I try and write research protocols for that, I try and find a model of what a good research, and I literally like go from one to the other in order to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So this is something that's useful whatever you're doing, and it's really useful to our students.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And sort of flowing in from that as well, I know one of the key pieces of advice when you're shifting to a distance or online learning model is that you're realistically not going to get through the same amount of content that you would ordinarily in a classroom. So do you have any advice for teachers on how to navigate that process, or work out how much work they should be setting for their students, how to navigate a balance between ensuring they're continuing to move through the curriculum whilst also not overloading students or themselves?
This is a nightmare. Yeah. Two bits of advice. So one, Christine Council, who's a big curriculum thinker in the UK, has a really nice distinction between core and hinterland knowledge. The core knowledge is the stuff that you want students to remember next year, in 5 years' time, in 20 years' time, because it is really important in understanding the subject that you teach and in understanding the world. And so, simple example might be to say, like, the key plot points in Othello. Maybe we don't want students to remember them forever, but we want them to, like, it's quite useful if you, in terms of cultural capital and being an informed adult, to know vaguely what happened. And then she talked about hinterland knowledge, which is the stuff that we don't mind if they don't remember. So we might want them to remember who Othello was and the situation he was in, but we don't necessarily need them to remember what happens in Act 3, Scene 1. The further point she makes, though, is like, that doesn't mean hinterland isn't important. Hinterland is the thing that makes Othello interesting. If we just quiz kids on the plot points of Othello, we are wiping out the point of teaching great literature. So if we're planning what we're going to do, say, like, if I want them to understand stuff now, I need to think about what the most important stuff to remember in the long term is, but also the stuff that's going to explain it right now. But the thing that should be really worrying me is, are they remembering the core stuff from previous years? Are they remembering the core stuff from what I'm teaching now? And so if I'm teaching Othello now, in 3 months' time, I might go back and just run a quiz that's like, okay, here are the 10 most important things I want students to remember from Othello. So my first tip would be really clear on what is core, what is hinterland in what you teach, but then forget about it. The second bit of advice might be, okay, like, what is going to happen when schools reopen? Hey, I don't know either. Can you set the test that students are going to do on day one when they come back? Okay, you might not want to give them a test on day one, like day 3. And I think there are 2 different kinds of tests we might set. And I think if we set them now, we make it easier to know where we're going. So type 1 would be, we're going to imagine that schools just reopened their doors today and nothing changed. So we're going to test kids on everything we taught them up until March that we hope they should know anyway, apart from what they forgot. Test 2 would be, okay, we're just going to have to say that this time was wiped out, and kids are going to go into the next school year or the next phase of their lives. So what's the test that you want students to be able to pass those now? Because we don't know which of those scenarios is going to play out. But by writing those, and when I say write those tests, like, that's a half-hour job, like, 10 questions in maths, 3 essay topics in English, whatever it is. But by writing those things now, hopefully you can then clarify in your own mind, what should students already know, and what more might I want them to know by the time we come back.
That's brilliant, thank you. We've had a number of questions come through that have focused on different aspects of sort of the social interactions and the social nature of learning. And I guess what comes into this is both the idea of how much time should teachers think about dedicating towards sort of core curriculum knowledge versus also supporting the well-being and social dimensions of a classroom or teaching activity. And also, how can teachers think about, and this is interconnected, think about providing more opportunities for those social interactions to take place as part of the learning process?
So I'm always really keen on separating those 2 things out so we can be clear about what we're doing at any one time. As a newer teacher, I would try and do things which would, like, teach kids the causes of World War I while also helping them to collaborate better. And what I quite often experienced was, like, we saw very poor collaboration, which meant that I was sort of like getting neither of the things that I'd want. So if, let's say, for the sake of argument, I've got an hour online lesson with my students, I might say, okay, we're going to do 15 minutes catch up. I'm not going to try and teach anything. I just want to know how my students are doing, give them the chance to vent, give them the chance to hear from one another. And then I'm going to call a halt to that, and I'm going to teach them whatever it is I want to teach them. And I think now, clearly, we might be in the middle of a lesson and a kid just says, like, oh, I'm really sad, I'm worried about my mum. And in that case, we might want to stop the lesson as we would ordinarily, make it easier to concentrate on the thing at the moment.
You still there, Harry?
I am, yeah. Can you hear me?
Vaguely. I personally missed quite a lot of that last answer. It's all right. I've got a few other people backing up. Unfortunately, the reception and the sound audio is not too great. Is there any way that you could recap sort of the key highlights of what you just said?
Yeah, yeah. I'll have another go, and then I'll try and join the call on audio if need be. So yeah, give yourself time in which you're going to do teaching. If you've got an hour lesson, give yourself time in which you're going to do teaching and time in which you're going to do well-being stuff, and don't try and smush those two things together.
Brilliant. Excellent. That was a very good summary. So essentially thinking about how you can sort of differentiate them, not trying to combine the two, but actually providing a good amount of time to focus on each side of it. And also, I think I caught something in your discussion as well about a time for sort of social interactions at the beginning, and then calling quite a strong halt to that, and then moving into sort of a different phase of your lesson after that.
So yeah, my argument would be like, if you try and do both, you end up doing both of them badly, because you're like trying to do two things at once. So yeah, like separate out in your own mind, 15 minutes of this, then I'm going to stop, 30 minutes of that. And in those 15 minutes, don't think about academic content at all. Just think about your kids' well-being and what you can do to contribute to that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Another question around, if we're thinking about sort of developing norms and practices and expectations, is that something that should be thought about as being consistent across a whole school? Or does it work for each individual teacher to be thinking about sort of how they want to set up the norms and expectations for their individual classes?
This is a really, really tricky one. As a classroom teacher, I'd kind of rather be left alone to like do stuff the way that I think is going to work. But realistically, if we go back to this idea of habit formation, the more consistency that my students get, the easier it's going to be for them to form habits. So if the English teacher and the math teacher and social studies teacher are all saying like, plan out your time, English at 10, maths at 11, up to me. And that means if I have an interaction with the maths teacher where they say, make sure that you do X, Y, and Z, that kind of reinforces what the English teacher and the social studies teacher are doing, and that minimizes the extent that we have to duplicate our effort. So that, yeah, reducing the burden on us. So ideally, and like the kind of stuff that I'm talking about in terms of planning your day, formulating habits and so on, is pretty unarguable, I think. And so I would hope that's something that everyone can agree on. And if they can, if it's coming from the school, it's coming from every teacher, that will make it easier for students to follow.
Brilliant, thank you. And a lot of our conversation this evening has really focused around a model where we are delivering teaching and learning utilizing the internet and online learning opportunities. Do you have any ideas about how schools and teachers can be thinking about supporting the students where they say may not have access to a device or the internet at home?
Yeah, so I've got a friend who works with schools in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she got in touch with me about a month ago, and she was like, they're going to shut the schools. We're not going to, like, kids don't have internet, kids don't have phones, parents often don't have phones, what are we going to give them? And so there were a couple of things that we talked about that might work. So one of them was the idea of recursive habits. That feels a bit juggling. It's the idea of like a thing that builds upon everything else that you've done previously. So something you could ask the kids to do every day that will have increasing amount of benefits rather than just being repetition. So if we just ask the kids to repeat their times tables every day, that's not recursive, because eventually they're going to reach a peak and there's going to be nothing more they can benefit from doing that. And the two things that might help, I think, are self-quizzing and concept mapping. So if you can provide guidance to students in how to review previous work or review whatever work they've got at home and quiz themselves on it, or how to review previous work or whatever resources they've got, and turn those into visual concept maps, processing them meaningfully. That's something that students can keep doing. And look, if they've got an encyclopedia at home or any book, they can apply that to anything and learn something from it. So what are the things that you can teach students to that will be useful on an ongoing basis? And they might have, like, maybe you'll post a pack of work home to them every fortnight, and they can apply the same techniques to it, but they know what the technique is. And the second thing is I came across an organization that again works in sub-Saharan Africa, where they provide 6 million parents lessons over WhatsApp, and each lesson is like 300 character messages. So if you can you can send a text message a day or a text message a week to parents or to kids or whoever, is there a problem, a question, a thought experiment, a writing prompt, something you could ask them to do around the house that could be valuable? Maybe they can text back an answer, like, even if it's only in 50 characters, you still know they're all right. So yeah, either things that they can keep doing that's useful, or things that are boiled down but still comprehensible.
Brilliant, thank you. I recognise that we are quickly coming to the end of our time, so just encouraging anyone, if they have any last minute questions that they'd like to send through, that would be brilliant. I have a question about whether there are particular technology tools. Obviously, we're completely changing tangent from the last question I just asked. Are there particular technology tools that you could recommend for people to utilize or to think about engaging with?
So there's a two-parter to this. Again, when I'm working with teachers, the thing that I start off with is, look, they're super busy, and if I give them an annoying tool and it doesn't work for them, they're going to switch off and they're not going to touch it again. So I do everything with them through three things: 1, email; 2, Zoom; and 3, Slack, which is the one that people might not be familiar with, which is, and like, imagine WhatsApp, but maybe a bit more sophisticated. And I know that it works because people never complain to me about any of the tech tools. And I see colleagues working on different programs try to do more complicated things and then get complaints. So part one of my answer is to say, like, now is not a great time for you and for students to learn about new technology tools unless you know for sure that it's really going to make your life easier. Stick to stuff that's super simple: Zoom and email, great. Text messages, WhatsApp, whatever. Part two, and again, every like 6 months or a year, my colleagues come to me and they're like, we've got this great new platform, do you want to like move your resources onto it? And I'm like, I'm just going to wait and let you guys perfect it, and maybe I'll do it next year. And normally within a year, they're like, oh, actually, we're not going to do that. We've got this other great new platform. And so my advice here, like, if you're what they'd call an early adopter and you love tech and you've got time to like look into all the different platforms that are out there, be my guest. But if you're not, I would wait for a teacher, colleague, a friend to come to you and say, like, hey, I have found the perfect platform and this is why you need to use it. Because like, I know they're out there. I've read a couple of blog posts promoting things that are like, I was really skeptical and this platform is great. But unless you've got loads of time and no toddlers in the house yourself, I would wait for someone to be like, I've solved all the problems, I'll talk you through it, this is how it works for my class, and here it is. And that would be my moment to take it up rather than fishing around for it now.
Brilliant. And just following up on one tiny point that a lot of people have mentioned, and that is around Slack. And I know that there are just people asking, do we have Slack here? Yes, we do. It is available to anyone in New Zealand, used by quite a few businesses, but possibly not so big in the education sector right now.
I'm on commission to them. I've just put the link in the
chat. Terrific. That's brilliant, Harry. I just wondered if you could finish this evening by just recapping sort of any top tips or big pieces of advice that you do have for teachers right now.
1, give yourself a break. Society's in chaos. Teachers are doing amazing work. Often they're doing amazing work with small people running around their ankles. Do the best you can for your kids, as you always do, but don't expect that to be everything that you might ordinarily be doing. 2, whatever you're going to do, keep it super, super simple. It makes it easier for you, it makes it easier for your students. yeah, I don't think I can top those. But I guess three, you know, sort of, we've got some blog posts that are going up on the Education Hub website. Feel free to reach out to me. My contact details are somewhere on there. So if you've got specific questions, or yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Thank you. And that's a very good reminder for me to remind our audience tonight that Harry, we do have our first post up by Harry on our website, and we do have 3 more coming where he will delve in more deeply to some of the ideas that he's discussed this evening. And I just echo that if you do have any questions, feel free to feed them into me, and I will make sure they get to Harry as well. And I know that we've also got a few more questions coming through on the chat, and we didn't manage to get to all of them. But I would also say that we do have some more webinars coming up which may touch on some of the issues and questions that were raised this evening. In particular, this coming Monday, we have Natalie Flynn, who's a clinical psychologist, who will be talking about wellbeing with a particular focus on both teachers and students. So if that's something you'd like more support in or to know more about, I suggest that you head to our website to register for that. But for now, I just want to say a big thank you to you, Harry, for talking with us. You've given so much advice and so many practical ideas, which I think at the moment are so valuable to teachers. And also, I think just a touch of just a real understanding and compassion for the situation that everyone's in, but particularly teachers having to not only completely transform the way that they work and the way that they teach, but also do so in a really difficult situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great evening once you get that far.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.